We are elected members of Parliament. All ministers serve this House, not Sky News or the BBC. So I do hope the message is going back. The ministerial code is not fit for purpose if this continues to happen. So I hope it's going to be used and make sure that ministers take it seriously.
The unthinkable has just happened, and it came from the Speaker himself. No opposition ambush, no fiery backbench revolt, no dramatic walkout. Instead, the man whose job is to keep order in Parliament suddenly became the story. And what he said sent a shockwave straight through the government benches. Because Sir Lindsay Hoyle didn't just issue a polite reminder. He didn't just ask ministers to be more careful. He stood up in front of the entire House and publicly called out the government. And the message was brutal. For the second day in a row, the Speaker said he was disappointed. Not with the opposition, not with hecklers, but with the government itself. Why? Because major announcements were being leaked to the media before they were given to Parliament.
Order, before we come to the statement on commonhold and leasehold reform, I once again note for the second day in a row my disappointment about briefings to the media before important announcements are brought to the House. As the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee recently stated, making the most important statements in the first instance to Parliament means doing so before they're made to the media, not at the first available opportunity thereafter. These are the government's own rules in its own ministerial code, and it must do better. I'm defending backbenchers on both sides. They've been elected here to hear it. Sky News and BBC is not the way that we do business. If there are issues of market sensitivity, or indeed any other sensitivities, ministers are welcome to seek advice from my office or the clerks on how the best balance of these sensitivities might legitimate or need to update me before the media. We've got to work together on this. The message is clear. I'm not in charge of the code, the Prime Minister is. He needs to take the code more seriously.
In Westminster, that's not a small mistake. That's a serious breach of parliamentary respect. And Sir Lindsay made it crystal clear that he wasn't going to let it slide. He reminded the House that there are rules, the government's own rules, laid out in the ministerial code. And those rules say something very simple. Before we continue, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Britain Daily. It's completely free, and it helps us keep bringing you the hard-hitting stories that matter. Back to the chaos. Parliament must hear important announcements first. Not Sky News, not the BBC, not a late-night briefing to friendly journalists. But according to the Speaker, that's exactly what had been happening. And then came the line that stopped the chamber cold. He said he was defending backbench MPs on both sides of the House. The people who were elected to represent their constituents and hear government decisions firsthand. Not television anchors, not newspaper editors, members of Parliament. He made it absolutely clear. Sky News and the BBC is not the way we do business. That wasn't just a comment, that was a warning. Because when the Speaker starts publicly scolding the government, it means something has gone seriously wrong behind the scenes. And then came the most pointed remark of all. Sir Lindsay reminded the chamber that he isn't in charge of the ministerial code. The Prime Minister is. And his message to Downing Street was unmistakable. The Prime Minister needs to take the code more seriously. In other words, this wasn't just about one briefing or one mistake. This was about a pattern, a growing frustration at the very top of the Commons. And the real question now is this. If the Speaker is openly calling out the government, what exactly has been going on behind closed doors? Because this moment may have looked like a simple procedural warning, but it could be the start the chamber hadn't even moved on to the next statement. And already the damage had been done. Because when a Speaker publicly scolds the government, it sends a message far beyond the green benches. It tells every MP, every journalist, and every voter watching that something isn't being handled properly behind the scenes. And this wasn't a vague criticism. It was direct, it was pointed, and it was aimed straight at the top. Sir Lindsay Hoyle reminded everyone that these weren't just informal expectations. These were the government's own rules, written into the ministerial code. The same code ministers are supposed to follow. The same code the Prime Minister is responsible for enforcing. So when the Speaker says the code isn't being taken seriously, he isn't just talking about a technical breach. He's questioning the discipline and authority at the very heart of the government. And that's where the pressure really starts to build. Because backbench MPs, from both sides, don't like being the last to know. They were elected to represent their constituencies, to hear announcements in the chamber, to question ministers directly. But if journalists are hearing it first, what does that say about Parliament's role? That's the frustration the Speaker was voicing. Not just his own, but the frustration of MPs across the House. He even offered a solution. If there were concerns about market sensitivity or other issues, ministers could come to his office. They could seek advice. They could find the right balance. In other words, there was no excuse. No reason to bypass Parliament. No reason to go straight to the media. And yet, according to the Speaker, it had happened again, for the second day in a row. That's not an accident, that's a pattern. And when patterns start to form in Westminster, they become political problems very quickly. Because this isn't just about etiquette, it's about respect, authority, and who really controls the message. When announcements are leaked before they reach the Commons, it gives the impression that the government is more concerned with headlines than with accountability. More interested in managing the news cycle than facing MPS directly. And that's exactly the kind of perception that can cause real damage, not just inside Parliament, but out in the country. Because voters expect decisions to be debated openly, not drip-fed to the press in advance. So when the Speaker stands up and says, effectively, this must stop, it becomes more than a procedural issue. It becomes a political flashpoint. And the uncomfortable truth for Downing Street is this. If the Speaker is warning them publicly, he may have already warned them privately, which raises the question. If this keeps happening, what consequences could come next? Because the Speaker's patience is clearly wearing thin, and the next confrontation could be far more explosive. By the time the Speaker finished, the chamber had gone quiet. Not the usual noisy, theatrical silence of Westminster, but the kind of silence that comes when everyone knows a line has just been crossed. Because what had just happened wasn't normal. This wasn't a heated debate. This wasn't party politics. This was the referee stepping in and warning the government in front of the entire House. And when the referee speaks, everyone listens. Sir Lindsay Hoyle made it clear. He wasn't the one in charge of the ministerial code. The Prime Minister was. That single line carried enormous weight because it shifted the responsibility away from individual ministers and placed it squarely on the shoulders of the man at the top. If the code wasn't being followed, if announcements were being leaked, if Parliament was being sidelined, then the question wasn't just about one department or one briefing. It was about leadership. It was about control. And it was about whether the government was respecting the very institution it was supposed to answer to. For backbench MPS, that matters more than almost anything else, because Parliament isn't just a building. It's the place where decisions are meant to be explained, challenged and held to account. When that process is bypassed, trust starts to erode. First among MPs, then among the public. And once that trust starts to slip, it becomes very difficult to win back. That's why the Speaker's words carried so much force. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't grandstanding, he was issuing a calm, clear warning. And those are often the most dangerous kinds, because they suggest the next step might not be so calm. If the rules keep being ignored, if Parliament keeps being sidelined, if briefings to the media continue before statements to the House, then the pressure on the government will only grow. And the next time the Speaker rises to his feet, the tone might be very different. For now, though, the message was unmistakable. Follow the code, respect Parliament, or face the consequences. And for a government already under scrutiny, that warning couldn't have come at a worse time. If you found this breakdown useful, make sure you like, share and subscribe for more straight-talking political coverage. Thanks for watching. The unthinkable had already happened inside the House of Commons. But what mattered even more was what it actually meant. Because this wasn't just a procedural complaint. It wasn't just a Speaker reminding ministers about a rule. This was a warning shot, fired straight at the Prime Minister. When Sir Lindsay Hoyle stood up and said the government needed to take the code more seriously, he wasn't talking to some junior minister buried in a department. He was talking about leadership. He was talking about discipline. And he was talking about control at the very top. Because the ministerial code doesn't float around Westminster on its own. It sits on the Prime Minister's desk. It exists under his authority. And it's his responsibility to enforce it. So when the Speaker says the code is being ignored, that's not a small slip. That's a signal that the system isn't working as it should. And politically, that's dangerous. Because one of the key promises of this government was professionalism, competence, a return to proper standards after years of chaos and controversy. But what the Speaker described was something very different. He described a government more focused on briefing journalists than respecting Parliament. A government more interested in shaping headlines than answering MPS. And that creates a perception problem. Because once it starts to look like decisions are being leaked to the media before elected representatives hear them, it raises a very uncomfortable question. Who is the government really speaking to first, the public or the press? And that question matters. Parliament is supposed to be the centre of democratic accountability. It's where ministers are questioned, where decisions are challenged, where policies are defended in real time. If announcements are going to the media first, that process is weakened. MPS become spectators. Journalists become the first audience. And the chamber itself starts to feel like an afterthought. That's why the Speaker stepped in.